What an amazing gathering of minds, hearts, and souls in an amazing setting, just miles away from where my own grandparents lived and where so many members of my own family perished. This is a conference about the future, not about the past. We will build on the past, but we are talking about the future. We are talking about how to prevent recurring genocides. Any conference about Nuremberg is a conference that raises more questions than it will provide answers. Not questions about the Nuremberg laws. Those have very few questions that have to be raised about them. As Justice Jackson said at Nuremberg, the worst and the most odious of all oppressions are those that mask as justice. And the Nuremberg laws masked as justice. But the questions we will be addressing today are profound. They range from some which seem simple to us in retrospect. When the war was over, many among the victors said, let's not have trials, let's just shoot the perpetrators. And no, the decision was made to put the perpetrators, at least the leaders, on trial. Was that the right decision? Was Secretary Morgenthau correct when he said that the response to Germany should be to relegate them to an agrarian society for half a century? Or was Secretary of State Marshall correct when he said, let's rebuild Germany, let's reward them in effect? Hitler said, if we kill the Jews, we will be wealthier. And the Marshall Plan made that tragic prediction come true for good reasons, because we were fighting the Cold War. But the moral issues raised by our macro response to Germany are worthy of consideration. Was the Nuremberg trial an example of victor's justice? Or could objective justice be rendered by victors and by judges selected by the victors themselves? What were the source of laws on which the Nuremberg defendants were placed on trial? Were they ex post facto laws? Did they result from a consensus about what the law should have been, or might have been, or actually was at the time the crimes were perpetrated? Was it correct to limit the trials to initially a few handfuls of leaders and then perhaps a few hundred of secondary leaders? Or should there have been an attempt to apply the Nuremberg principles more broadly to every hands-on perpetrator, many of whom lived happy lives and died in their beds surrounded by loving children and grandchildren? Was the United States correct when, through John McCloy, it pardoned so many of the convicted Nuremberg criminals in the name of fighting the future Cold War? Did the Nuremberg trials do more good on balance or more harm? Why have so many genocides been permitted to go on after the Nuremberg trials were over? And is the ICC, the International Criminal Court, whose distinguished initial prosecutor sits among us today, is the ICC the legacy of the Nuremberg trials? And can the ICC, unlike the International Court of Justice, which is neither international nor a court nor renders justice, can the ICC actually administer justice? Will it apply the principle of the worst first, which is the central mantra of any human rights program? You must prosecute the worst first, which is why the BDS movement is so antagonistic to human rights, because its focus is only on one country, only on the nation state of the Jewish people, and doesn't try to apply principles across the board based on the worst first. Has the United Nations, on balance, done more harm than good in genocide prevention? Surely the Council on Human Rights has done more harm than good in the way they have rewarded bigotry and rewarded racism and rewarded sexism and punished justice. The one commitment that we know we must have based on the Holocaust is a commitment to truth. And the commitment to truth requires that we honor the research of people like Jan Gross and not condemn them for telling the truth about the mixed legacy of Poland. But it also requires that we remember Jan Karski, one of the great heroes, a man who has been a personal hero to me, a man who I had the opportunity to meet when he was an older professor at Georgetown University, a man who sacrificed everything, a non-Jew, or Raoul Wallenberg. We have to remember Kiltze, but we have to remember as well the families, the Polish families, who sacrificed themselves to save Jews. And we have to remember Cardinal Glemp, who only recently died and was the primate of Poland into this century, an overt anti-Semite and bigot who tried as hard as he could to repeat the legacy of what led us to the Holocaust. Truth requires that we tell painful truths, even to people who are our hosts, even to people who are here and trying to be helpful to us. And we must recall that the newest form of Holocaust denial and the most vicious form of contemporary Holocaust denial is the attempt by some to equate what the Nazis did to the Jews with what the nation-state of the Jewish people today is doing to the Palestinian people. To even suggest that equation, which is rampant throughout Europe, even in the face of Holocaust denial laws, to even suggest that analogy is to say, A, there were no gas chambers in Germany or in Poland or in the Ukraine or anywhere else in occupied Germany. There were no gas chambers because there are no gas chambers now. There were no attempts to ingather people to kill them the way the Jews were ingathered from places as far as Rhodes and Salonika to bring them to Auschwitz to kill them. There were no targeting of babies. There were no actions against children to try to destroy the genetic core of the Jewish people, and that the Nazis must have acted in self-defense because that's what the nation-state of the Jewish people is doing. And we must focus on the continued victimization of civilians today. Every evil takes a new form. But today, there are genocides again. What's going on in Syria, what has gone on in Rwanda and Darfur and Cambodia were nothing short of genocides. Today, rape has become a weapon of war. We saw it in the former Yugoslavia. We see it among ISIS today. And today, another form of victimization of civilians is the deliberate use of civilians as human shields in an effort to target other civilians. That is an abuse of civilians and an abuse of human rights, and it must be taken into account by the International Criminal Court and by other institutions. So the future is what we're going to be talking about today, and the future is in our hands, and we will have no excuse if we do not protect it. Thank you.
And now you can hear, can see, can feel not only the importance of today, but the honored presence we have of both Erwin Kotler and Alan Dershowitz on the same podium addressing the Nuremberg of hate and the Nuremberg of justice. Please join me in honoring our symposium co-chairs, Alan Dershowitz and Erwin Kotler.